There are moments in life when everything you thought you understood about people gets turned completely upside down. This is one of those stories. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon flight from Chicago to Los Angeles, and what started as an ordinary boarding process became something nobody on that plane would ever forget. Sometimes the people we dismiss without a second thought turn out to be the very ones who teach us the most profound lessons about what it means to be human. Gerald Patterson had been cleaning the offices at Morrison Financial Group for 17 years. Every night, long after the executives had gone home to their suburban mansions, Gerald would arrive with his cart, his mop, his quiet determination. He'd empty the trash bins filled with discarded reports that represented more money than he'd see in a lifetime. He'd scrub the floors that expensive shoes had walked across without a second thought. He'd wipe down the conference tables where decisions affecting thousands of lives were made by people who never once looked him in the eye. Gerald was 62 years old, with hands that showed every year of hard labor, a back that ached from decades of bending and lifting, and a heart that somehow remained gentle despite a world that had given him every reason to become bitter. He lived in a small apartment on the south side, took 2 buses to get to work, and sent money every month to his daughter in Detroit who was raising 2 kids on her own. His uniform was always clean even if it was worn thin in places. His smile was always ready even if nobody ever seemed to notice it. But Gerald had a secret that none of those executives knew about. Years ago when he was a young man he'd served in Vietnam. He'd carried wounded soldiers through rice paddies under enemy fire. He'd held dying boys in his arms and promised to right their mothers. He'd earned medals that now sat in a shoebox in his closet because he'd never felt right about displaying them. When he came home, the country wasn't exactly rolling out parades for men who looked like him, and the promise of opportunities never materialized the way the recruiters had said they would. So Gerald took whatever work he could find and he did it with dignity, because his mother had taught him that all honest work deserves respect, even if the world doesn't always show it. He never complained, never made excuses, never asked for special treatment. He just showed up, did his job and went home. The trip to Los Angeles wasn't something Gerald would normally do. He couldn't afford plane tickets and he'd never had much reason to travel anyway. But his grandson Marcus was graduating from UCLA, the first person in their family to finish college, and Gerald had promised he'd be there no matter what. He'd saved for 8 months, putting aside $20 here, $30 there, skipping meals sometimes to make the numbers work. When he finally had enough for the ticket, he booked the cheapest seat he could find, a middle seat in the very last row, the one that doesn't recline, right next to the bathroom. He didn't care. He was going to see his grandson walk across that stage, and that was worth any discomfort. The morning of the flight, Gerald put on his best clothes, a navy blue suit he'd bought at a thrift store and had carefully pressed the night before, a white shirt, a tie his late wife had given him 20 years ago. He polished his old dress shoes until they shone. When he looked in the mirror, he saw a man ready to celebrate something beautiful, ready to witness a dream coming true. The airport was overwhelming, all rushing crowds and announcements echoing off high ceilings and the smell of expensive coffee that cost more than Gerald typically spent on lunch for a week. He found his gate, sat down in the waiting area, and watched families reuniting, business travelers typing importantly on laptops, young people taking selfies. Nobody looked at him. That was normal. People like Gerald become invisible after a while, especially in places where everyone's in a hurry, where everyone's focused on their own destination, their own importance. When boarding started, Gerald waited patiently for his group to be called, the last group, the one for people in the back of the plane. He stood in line, ticket in hand, heart full of anticipation about seeing Marcus. He thought about how proud his late wife would have been, how she'd always believed their grandson could do anything he set his mind to. Gerald was smiling to himself, lost in these warm thoughts, when he reached the gate agent. "Ticket please," the agent said without looking up, her voice flat with the boredom of repetition. Gerald handed over his phone with the mobile boarding pass displayed. The agent scanned it and her expression changed. She looked at the screen, then at Gerald, then back at the screen with obvious confusion. "There's been some kind of error," she said, her tone now suspicious, almost accusatory. "This shows a first-class seat." Gerald's smile faltered. "Oh, I bought coach seat 32B, he said politely. "There must be a mistake." The agent tapped on her keyboard, her frown deepening. "The system says you've been upgraded to seat 2A, first class. But that can't be right." She looked Gerald up and down, taking in his thrift store suit, his worn shoes, his calloused hands. Her eyes narrowed with an assumption she didn't bother to hide. "Did you do something to this boarding pass? These upgrades are for our premium members only." The words hit Gerald like a slap, though his expression barely changed. He'd experienced this kind of thing before, this immediate suspicion, this assumption that someone who looked like him, dressed like him, couldn't possibly belong in the front of the plane. "No, ma'am," Gerald said quietly, his dignity intact despite the embarrassment burning in his chest. "I didn't change anything. I just used the boarding pass the airline sent me." The agent called over her supervisor, a thin man with glasses and an expression that suggested he dealt with problems, not people. The supervisor scanned Gerald's phone, tapped on his tablet and shook his head. "This is clearly an error," he announced loudly enough that other passengers in line were starting to stare. "Sir, you'll need to go to your assigned seat in the back. We can't have people just claiming first-class seats." Gerald felt the eyes on him, felt the heat of humiliation creeping up his neck. "I'm not claiming anything," he said, keeping his voice steady. "I'm just trying to board with the pass your airline gave me." The supervisor's expression hardened. "Sir, I'm going to ask you to step aside. You're holding up the line." Other passengers were murmuring now, some with impatience, some with that particular kind of discomfort people feel when they witness someone being treated unfairly but don't want to get involved. Gerald stepped aside, his throat tight, his hands trembling slightly. This was supposed to be a good day, a day of celebration, and now he was standing there being treated like he'd done something wrong, like he was trying to cheat the system, like he didn't deserve basic respect. Other first-class passengers were boarding now, flowing past Gerald with their expensive luggage and their confident strides, some glancing at him with curiosity, some with disdain, all of them making assumptions. A woman in a designer suit and heels that probably cost more than Gerald's monthly rent looked at him with barely concealed disgust. A businessman with a Rolex actually laughed, a cruel little sound, and muttered something to his companion about "these people" trying to scam their way into places they don't belong. Gerald heard it. He heard all of it. And he stood there with his head up, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing him break, even though inside his heart was cracking. What Gerald didn't know was that there had indeed been an upgrade, but it wasn't an error. 3 days earlier, the CEO of Morrison Financial Group, Richard Morrison himself, had been reviewing some security footage from the office. He'd stayed late one evening to retrieve a file he'd forgotten, and while fast-forwarding through the recordings, he'd seen something that stopped him cold. There was Gerald, cleaning Richard's office at 2 in the morning as he did every night. But this night, Richard watched as Gerald carefully picked up a framed photograph from the desk, a picture of Richard's father who had passed away 6 months ago. Richard watched as Gerald looked at that photograph for a long moment, then gently wiped the frame with a clean cloth, handling it with such care, such tenderness, before placing it back exactly where it had been. It was such a small thing, such a simple gesture, but something about it hit Richard hard. He realized he'd walked past Gerald for 17 years and never once asked his name, never once said thank you, never once acknowledged that this quiet man who kept his office clean was a human being with his own life, his own losses, his own story. Richard had started asking questions. He'd learned Gerald's name. He'd learned about his grandson, about the graduation, about the flight Gerald had booked. And Richard had felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time, genuine shame at his own blindness, his own casual cruelty of indifference. So he'd quietly arranged for Gerald's seat to be upgraded, first class, as a small gesture of thanks, of recognition, of apology for 17 years of invisibility. He'd done it anonymously, wanting no credit, no recognition. He just wanted Gerald to have one nice thing, one moment of comfort. But Richard hadn't anticipated that the system's algorithms would flag the upgrade as suspicious, that a man who'd paid for the cheapest seat and didn't have elite status would be automatically suspected of fraud. He hadn't anticipated that his gesture of kindness would become another moment of humiliation for a man who deserved so much better. The supervisor finally looked up from his tablet. "Sir, there's definitely been a system error. Your original seat is still available. Please proceed to the back of the aircraft." Gerald nodded slowly. He'd fought in a war. He'd buried his wife. He'd worked his fingers raw for decades. He could handle this small indignity. "Yes, sir," he said quietly. He picked up his small carry-on bag, one he'd borrowed from a neighbor because he didn't own luggage, and started walking down the jetway. Behind him, he heard the woman in the designer suit say to her companion, "I don't understand why they even let those people on the plane. It's uncomfortable for everyone." Gerald kept walking. He'd learned a long time ago that responding to cruelty only multiplies it. Dignity, his mother had taught him, means maintaining your grace especially when others have lost theirs. But someone else had heard that comment and she wasn't about to let it pass. Her name was Charlotte Wu, and she was in seat 1B, directly across the aisle from the seat that should have been Gerald's. Charlotte was a federal judge, though she didn't advertise it. She was flying to Los Angeles for a conference, and she'd witnessed the entire scene at the gate. She'd watched this elderly man be humiliated, questioned, treated like a criminal for trying to board a plane with a legitimate ticket. She'd seen the supervisor's dismissive attitude, heard the cruel comments from fellow passengers, and felt her blood pressure rising with each passing moment. Charlotte had spent her career fighting for justice, for fairness, for the principle that every person deserves equal treatment under the law. And what she'd just witnessed was the opposite of everything she believed in. If you've ever felt invisible, if you've ever been judged by what you do instead of who you are, then you know exactly what Gerald was feeling in that moment. I'm sharing this story with you because I believe we need to hear these truths. We need to remember that everyone, absolutely everyone, has a story worth knowing. If this story is touching your heart, I'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to this channel and turn on your notifications. And please share your own experiences in the comments. Have you ever witnessed someone being treated unfairly because of how they looked or what they did for a living? Your stories matter, and this community is here to listen with open hearts. Charlotte stood up as Gerald passed her seat, heading toward the back. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice clear and authoritative. Gerald stopped, turned slightly, expecting another confrontation, another moment of shame. But Charlotte's face was kind, her eyes warm with concern. "Sir, I believe there's been a terrible mistake. Would you please come here for a moment?" Gerald hesitated, confused. Charlotte gestured to the empty first-class seat next to her, seat 2A, the one that had been meant for him. "That seat belongs to you, doesn't it? According to your boarding pass." Gerald nodded uncertainly. "Yes, ma'am, but they said it was an error, and I don't want to cause any trouble." Charlotte's expression hardened, but not at Gerald. At the injustice of the situation. "You're not causing trouble. Someone else is." She turned to the flight attendant who'd been watching the interaction with growing discomfort. "Excuse me, could you please check this gentleman's boarding pass? I believe he's been assigned to first class, and he's being prevented from taking his rightful seat." The flight attendant, a young woman named Jennifer who'd also been disturbed by what she'd witnessed at the gate, took Gerald's phone and examined the boarding pass carefully. Her face flushed with embarrassment. "Sir, this clearly shows you're assigned to seat 2A. I'm so sorry for the confusion. Please take your seat." She looked at Gerald with genuine apology in her eyes. "Can I help you with your bag?" Gerald felt like he was in a dream, a surreal reversal of what had just happened. "Are you sure?" he asked quietly. "I don't want to cause problems." Charlotte spoke up firmly. "The only problem here is that you were treated disrespectfully when you were simply trying to board your assigned seat. Please sit down. You belong here just as much as anyone else." Gerald slowly lowered himself into the seat, still half expecting someone to tell him it was all a mistake. The seat was like nothing he'd ever experienced, wide and comfortable, with more legroom than seemed necessary. Jennifer brought him a warm towel and a glass of water. "Again, I'm so sorry for what happened," she said softly. "That should never have occurred." The supervisor who dismissed Gerald at the gate had boarded the plane, presumably to ensure the problem had been resolved. When he saw Gerald sitting in first class, his face turned an interesting shade of red. He started to approach, clearly ready to remove Gerald forcibly if necessary, but Charlotte stood up and blocked his path. She pulled out her identification, a small leather case that she rarely used for intimidation but was willing to deploy now. "I'm Judge Charlotte Wu, 7th Circuit Court of Appeals," she said, her voice quiet but carrying an unmistakable authority. "This passenger has a legitimate boarding pass for this seat. If you attempt to remove him, I'll be filing a formal complaint with the Department of Transportation for discrimination, and I'll be happy to testify about what I witnessed at the gate. Am I making myself clear?" The supervisor's face went from red to pale. He stammered something about system errors and policies, but Charlotte cut him off. "The only error I see is in how your staff treated a paying customer. I suggest you return to your duties and allow this man to fly in peace." The supervisor retreated, practically stumbling in his haste to get away. Charlotte sat back down and turned to Gerald with a warm smile. "I'm Charlotte," she said, extending her hand. "And I'm very sorry you had to experience that ugliness." Gerald shook her hand, his own hands trembling slightly. "Gerald Patterson, ma'am. And thank you. You didn't have to do that." Charlotte's eyes softened. "Yes, I did. We all have to stand up when we see injustice or we become part of the problem. Now, I don't want to pry, but you seem like you're traveling for something special. That's a celebration suit if I ever saw one." Gerald's face lit up despite everything that had just happened. "My grandson is graduating from UCLA tomorrow. First person in our family to finish college." Charlotte beamed. That's wonderful. You must be so proud." They talked for a while and gradually Gerald's tension began to ease. Charlotte told him about her own grandchildren, about her journey from being the daughter of immigrants who worked in a laundry to sitting on a federal bench. And she listened, really listened, as Gerald talked about his life, his service in Vietnam, his work, his family, his late wife who'd always believed their grandson could achieve anything. There was one other passenger who'd been listening to every word of their conversation. His name was Thomas Brennan, and he was a documentary filmmaker sitting in seat 3C. He'd made his career telling stories about overlooked people, about the invisible ones who keep society running while receiving none of the credit. As he listened to Gerald's story unfold, as he watched this quiet man's dignity shine through despite the humiliation he'd endured, Thomas felt something shift inside him. This wasn't a story someone had pitched to him. This was real life, unfolding in real time, and it was more powerful than any script he'd ever read. During the flight, Thomas simply observed, watching Gerald carefully examine every aspect of the first-class experience with wonder, like a child seeing something magical. He watched Gerald politely refuse the alcoholic beverages but gratefully accept the orange juice, savoring it like it was something precious. And Thomas felt a reminder of why he'd started making documentaries in the first place, not to win awards but to honor the dignity of ordinary people living extraordinary lives. About halfway through the flight, Charlotte excused herself to use the restroom, and Thomas moved to sit next to Gerald. "Hi, I'm Thomas," he said. "I hope you don't mind me saying this, but I couldn't help overhearing your conversation. Your grandson's graduation, that's really something special." Gerald smiled. "Thank you. I'm very proud of him." Thomas hesitated, then decided to be direct. "I'm a filmmaker and I spend my life looking for stories about people who make the world work, people who don't get recognized enough. Would you mind if I asked you about your life?" What followed was one of the most remarkable conversations Thomas had ever had. Gerald talked about Vietnam, about the friends he'd lost, about coming home to a country that didn't want to acknowledge what he'd sacrificed. He talked about finding work wherever he could, about his wife who'd been a nurse's aide and had died of cancer 5 years ago. He talked about his work as a janitor with no shame, no apology. "I clean offices at Morrison Financial," he said. "Have for 17 years. It's honest work and I do it well." Thomas asked about what happened at the gate. Gerald was quiet for a long moment. Embarrassed, angry but not surprised. "When you look like me, when you do the work I do, people make assumptions. They see the uniform, the calluses, and they think they know everything about you. They think you're trying to get something you don't deserve. They don't see the person, the life, the sacrifices. They just see someone who doesn't belong in their space." He paused, then smiled sadly. "But I learned a long time ago that other people's assumptions don't define my worth. My worth comes from how I treat people, how I do my work, how I love my family. The rest is just noise." Thomas felt like he was in the presence of someone truly wise. "You're a remarkable man, Gerald," he said quietly. Gerald looked uncomfortable with the praise. "I'm just a man trying to do right by the people I love. That's all any of us can do." When the plane landed in Los Angeles, something unprecedented happened. As Gerald stood to gather his belongings, the passengers in first class began to applaud. It started with Charlotte, then Thomas, then spread until everyone in the section was clapping. Gerald stood there, confused and overwhelmed, tears streaming down his face. "I don't understand," he said to Charlotte. "Why are they clapping?" Charlotte put her hand on his arm. "Because you reminded us of something we'd forgotten. That dignity isn't about what you own or where you sit or what title you have. It's about how you carry yourself, how you treat others, how you maintain your grace when the world tries to strip it away. You showed us what that looks like." Gerald walked off the plane with Charlotte and Thomas on either side of him, like honored escorts rather than strangers he'd met a few hours ago. "I hope you're still with me because this is where the story becomes something even more beautiful. Sometimes one moment of courage, one act of standing up for what's right, can ripple out and change more lives than we can imagine." If you're finding hope and meaning in this story, I'd love it if you could take a moment to subscribe and turn on your notifications. And please share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever been that person who stood up for someone being treated unfairly? Or have you been in Gerald's position? This community is built on these shared experiences, on recognizing our common humanity. Your voice matters here and I read every comment with an open heart. Thomas kept his promise to Gerald. Over the following weeks, he created a short documentary about Gerald's life, interviewing him about Vietnam, about his work, about the humiliation at the gate and the kindness that followed. He talked to Charlotte, who spoke powerfully about the prejudice she'd witnessed and the courage it takes to intervene. Thomas even tracked down Richard Morrison, the CEO who'd arranged the upgrade. When they met in Richard's office, the same office Gerald had cleaned for 17 years, Richard was candid in a way that surprised Thomas. "I'm ashamed," Richard said simply. "For 17 years, a genuinely good man worked in this building, and I never once bothered to learn his name. I never once said thank you. I never once saw him as a human being. When I watched that security footage, saw how carefully he handled a photograph of my father, I realized what a failure of basic humanity that was." Richard's interview was powerful, a successful CEO admitting that he'd been blind, that he'd valued the wrong things, that a janitor had taught him more about character than any business school ever had. The documentary, titled Invisible, premiered at a small film festival and exploded. It went viral on social media. News outlets picked it up. Suddenly, Gerald's face was everywhere, his story being shared by millions. People talked about the times they'd been invisible, the times they'd made others invisible. Gerald was invited to speak at conferences, at universities, at corporate gatherings. He spoke simply, honestly, powerfully. "I'm not special," he'd say. "I'm just one of millions of people who work hard, love our families, and try to do right. The problem isn't that people like me exist. The problem is that people like me are treated as if we don't exist. Everyone deserves to be seen. Everyone deserves basic respect. That's not radical. That's just human decency." The impact was real and measurable. Morrison Financial, under Richard Morrison's leadership, implemented new policies requiring executives to learn the names of all staff members, to acknowledge the work of cleaning crews and maintenance workers. They raised wages for contract workers. The airline revised its customer service training, focusing on dignity for all passengers regardless of class of service. Charlotte Wu used her platform as a federal judge to speak about prejudice and the courage required to intervene when we witness injustice. And Thomas continued making films about overlooked people, rediscovering his purpose through Gerald's example. Gerald went to Marcus's graduation and wept openly when his grandson walked across that stage. Marcus knew about the documentary, about the conversations his grandfather had sparked. "That's just who Grandpa is," Marcus said. "He's always been the strongest, kindest, most dignified person I know. I'm glad the world is finally seeing what our family has always known." Gerald continued working as a janitor for another year. He could have retired, could have lived off speaking fees, but he liked his work, liked feeling useful. Richard Morrison made sure Gerald knew he was valued, that his work mattered, that he was seen. They had coffee sometimes, these two men from completely different worlds, and they talked as equals. Richard admitted he learned more from Gerald than Gerald learned from him. "He taught me that character isn't something you buy or achieve. It's something you practice every day in small moments when nobody's watching." Charlotte and Gerald stayed in touch too. She invited him to family gatherings, made sure he knew he had people who cared about him. On the anniversary of the flight, Charlotte, Thomas, and Gerald met for dinner in Los Angeles. They toasted to unexpected friendships, to the power of standing up for what's right, to the truth that every person deserves kindness. Years later, when Gerald passed away peacefully at 78, his funeral was attended by hundreds. Charlotte flew in from Chicago. Thomas came with camera equipment, not to film but simply to pay respects to a man who'd changed his life. Richard Morrison spoke about what Gerald had taught him. Marcus gave the eulogy, talking about a grandfather who'd raised him with love, who'd worked until his hands ached so Marcus could have opportunities, who'd served his country with honor, who'd been humiliated on an airplane and responded with grace. "My grandfather taught me that you don't measure a life by recognition or wealth or status," Marcus said, his voice breaking. "You measure it by love, by integrity, by how you treat people, by whether you make the world kinder, more aware of the humanity in every person. By that measure, my grandfather was the richest man I ever knew." Gerald's legacy lived on in countless ways. Schools incorporated the documentary into their curricula, teaching empathy and social justice. Students interviewed workers in their own schools, learning names and stories, discovering the complex lives behind the roles they'd never questioned. Churches used Gerald's story to preach about dignity and compassion. Medical schools added it to training about treating all patients with equal respect. Business schools used it in leadership courses. And in quieter corners of the world, workers who'd always felt invisible shared Gerald's story and felt seen, felt validated, felt like their work and lives mattered. A housekeeper in Atlanta watched the film and wrote to her daughter encouraging her to be proud of the work her mother did. A maintenance worker showed it to his teenage son who'd been embarrassed about what his father did, and they had a conversation that healed something broken between them. Marcus established a scholarship fund in his grandfather's name, supporting students from working-class families. The only requirement was a short essay about dignity, work, and respect. The essays that came in were heartbreaking and beautiful, full of stories about parents working multiple jobs, about grandparents sacrificing everything, about quiet heroism that deserved recognition. On what would have been Gerald's 80th birthday, Marcus organized a gathering at the cemetery. Charlotte came, and Thomas and Richard and dozens of others whose lives Gerald had touched. They stood together and shared memories, celebrating a life that had mattered profoundly. Marcus had commissioned a simple headstone with Gerald's name and a single line. "He taught us to see." Those 4 words captured everything Gerald had been about, everything his story had accomplished. He taught people to see the workers they'd ignored, to see the humanity they'd denied, to see their own prejudices, to see what really mattered in life. The story of Gerald Patterson continued to be told, continued to change hearts, continued to remind people of truths they'd forgotten. In a world determined to rank people by wealth or status or profession, Gerald's story was a counter-narrative, an insistence that every human being has inherent worth, that dignity exists as a birthright, that we're all connected in our shared humanity. It was about one man's grace, one woman's courage, one filmmaker's commitment to truth, one CEO's willingness to change. But more than that, it was about all of us, about the choices we make every day to either see or overlook, to respect or dismiss, to honor or humiliate the people we encounter. We all have the power to make someone feel invisible or to make them feel seen, and that choice, repeated across millions of daily interactions, shapes the kind of world we live in, the kind of society we create, the kind of people we become. Thank you for staying with me through this journey, through Gerald's story and all the lives it touched. I hope this has moved you the way it moved me in the telling. If you've ever felt invisible, if you've ever been dismissed because of what you do or how you look, I want you to know that your dignity is real, your work matters, and you deserve respect. And if you've ever made someone feel invisible, this is your invitation to change, to start seeing, to start honoring the humanity in every person you meet. Please subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications so we can continue sharing stories that matter, stories that remind us of our shared humanity. Share your own experiences in the comments below. Tell me about the people in your life who taught you about dignity and grace. Tell me about times you've witnessed injustice and found the courage to speak up, or times you wish you had. Suggest themes and stories you'd like to hear. This community exists because we believe in the fundamental worth of every human being, and your voice is part of that. Thank you for being here, for caring, for wanting to build a world where everyone is seen and valued. Until next time, treat everyone you meet with the kindness you'd want for yourself. Take care of yourselves and each other.